Welcome back to the Practical Church Podcast. I'm your host, Dotson, and today I'm going to share with you 6 tips for parenting in ministry. Before we get to that, as always, this show is brought to you in partnership with Mission Support. They offer you a number of services to help you love being a pastor. Again, I just want to highlight one of them. They do graphics and videos for your church. You'll be amazed at how outsourcing your graphics and video editing to our media specialists will save you money, free up your time, and make your church feel like it is a professional level media department. They support one-time unique projects as well as they offer a monthly comprehensive media support. So whether it's things like sermon graphics, event graphics, postcards, signage, social media posts, recap videos, bumper videos, testimony, story videos, man, they can help you really professionalize and make your stuff look a lot better at a really affordable rate. And so head to missionsupport.com to see how they might be able to help you today. Talk to one of their guides. And now let's get into today's episode. All right, 6 tips for parenting in ministry. So I just wanted to share some lessons we've learned over the years. We have, at this moment, we have a 10-year-old daughter, 7-year-old son, and we also foster. And so we've had 5 different kids in our home over the last couple of years as well. And so I just want to share some of the challenges, some of the things we've learned, some of the practical things when it comes to tips for parenting in ministry. Maybe some encouragement and then maybe some challenges that I've seen as well to make us think through how we actually doing and why it actually matters how we parent. And so here we go, 6 tips for parenting in ministry. Number 1 is this. You need to remember that your kids don't have to do more than other kids. So here's an encouragement. I would encourage you not to have this expectation that your kids have to do more than other kids, or even let your church, people at your church think that as well. Now, I will say, obviously, if they're your kids, the older they get, they might be around more, they might serve a little bit more just because they're with you and they're helping out. That's I'm not talking about that. But I'm just talking about, hey, I would encourage you not to feel like because they are my kids, they have to do X, Y, and Z. There's external pressure that you put on them or that other people put on them to do that. Now, I do think in some ways it's a lot healthier than maybe it was a few decades ago and further, where being a preacher's kid, there's a lot of pressure of they have to do all these things and especially from the church. Now, I think maybe more traditional context, that still might be the case. I think in more church plant world, I can only maybe speak from our personal experience. At New City, it's not like people at our church have expectations that our kids must do certain things or must, I don't think that pressure is as much anymore, at least not church planting world. But I just want to encourage you, it's okay that your kids can just be kids, and they don't have to do all the things. If you wouldn't expect other people's kids to do X, Y, and Z, your kids don't have to do either. Now, if they want to, or you need help and they're willing to help out, again, that's different. But I just want to encourage you to remind you that your kids don't have to do more than the other kids just because they're your kids. They can be kids. They can act like kids. They can do their own thing. So again, if they want to be part of what you're doing, that's awesome. But my encouragement is just don't have your kids do more than other kids just because they're your kids. Okay, so that was kind of quick. That's the first one. Your kids don't have to do more than other kids just because they're your kids. Here's the second one. That being said, here's a little bit of a challenge. Your kids need discipline, and you should have behavioral expectations for your children. So you should discipline your kids and have behavioral expectations for your children. So there's so many verses. I'll just read 2 of them here. Proverbs 10:17 says, "He who takes note of his teaching is a way of life, but he who gives up training is a cause of error." Proverbs 1:8, "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not neglect your mother's teaching." So there's a lot of other passages about parenting, and then also just training in godliness anyway. And the implication here is you will not drift into righteousness and godliness. Your kids will not drift into right behavior and pursuing godliness and the fruits of the Spirit. They won't. And so we should train and discipline our kids and have behavioral expectations. Now, I'm not saying they should be unrealistic or they should be unfair, but we should expect our kids to behave a certain way as followers of Jesus. Now, here's the tension, because yes, we cannot force, we cannot make. There's plenty of examples of people who were great parents and loved their kids, and things didn't turn out as the way they wanted. I always want to point out the Proverbs. Sometimes people get frustrated or they misunderstand the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs are principles, not promises. So, there's the famous verse, train up your child in the way that they should go, and when they grow older, they will not depart from it. And then you have somebody who has a kid who maybe departs from the faith or wilds out or whatever, and everyone's like, well, obviously they didn't train up their child. That's not what Proverbs is about. Proverbs is about principles. So generally speaking, if you do X, Y, and Z, then A, B, and C will be the result. Generally speaking, we live in a broken world. Things don't always work out like that. If you manage your money well, generally speaking, you'll be in a better position than if you don't. If you maintain your marriage well and love your spouse well, generally speaking, you'll be able to have a much better marriage than if you don't. So generally speaking, if you discipline your kids and have expectations for your kids, things will go better than if you don't. I also I want to say, again, part of the challenge in our highly individualistic culture is we try to separate everything. So, my kids are not a reflection of me, and I'm not a reflection of my kids and my grandparents and that sort of thing. And to some degree, that's absolutely right. Like, if somebody in your family does something, like, it's not your fault. However, just how human psychology and culture has developed, that if someone in your immediate family does something, that is going to color how people view you. Now, it might not be fair, and it could even be wrong, but that's still the reality of the situation. And so I just want to say, if you're a pastor or a leader at your church, how your kids behave and act is a reflection on you. And if that seems like a bit of a challenge, even in Titus, like the qualifications for elders talks about faithful kids. Now, again, there's a debate about does that mean like when they're older or when they're younger? I'm not going to get into like all that right now, but there is this expectation that like, if you can't run and lead and supervise, whatever synonym you want to use, your household well, how are you supposed to do that for the church? And so my challenge is like, how your kids live and behave matters, and it reflects to your other people your leadership ability. And so I just want to say, you should discipline your kids. And I'm not going to tell you how to do that. I'm not going to do that here, but I'm just saying you should have behavioral expectations for your kids. And if they don't measure up to them, there should be discipline. Loving, kind, gentleness. And again, I know it sounds like you're not allowed to say this in our culture today, but even in the scriptures, what does God say? Like in Hebrews and other places, that God disciplines his children. God disciplines those he loves. And so if this is like a struggle for you right now, like I would encourage you maybe read some books, talk to some older men and women in your church who you think parented well, want advice from. But it matters. And so how your kids behave matters, because again, this is tough because this is generally speaking. I've been in situations. I remember when Christine and I were married. We helped plant a church. This is one example. Helped plant a church in Wilmington, North Carolina before we moved back to Raleigh. And one of the elders was just very weird with their children. They had 2 kids at the time. Maybe they had 3. And they had all these rules and regulations and very, very, very just different than how everyone else was doing it. And hear me. This is not a judgment. This is not saying you can't parent your kids or you can't. I'm not saying that. But the husband was an elder in the church, and it made it really weird for all the other parents, because other parents were like, this guy's an elder, he's a leader of a church, but nobody in the church wanted to parent the way that they parented. And it mattered. And I think it matters even more if you're a pastor or you're on staff or you're the lead pastor or it matters. And so how your kids live matters. And so as followers of Jesus, just generally speaking, but as leaders in the church, we should discipline our kids, and we should have behavioral expectations for our kids that we train them to, because it is in some way a reflection on you. And I'm not saying it's always fair, but it's true. Now, I'll get to another point in a second, but this one, I just want to emphasize this one. Your kids need discipline, and you should have behavioral expectations for your children. And maybe because our culture pushes the other way, you should not feel bad about it. And I could get into a lot about parenting. Maybe it's a little bit of a soapbox for me. I would just say, generally speaking, things like gentle parenting, that is not training. That is letting your kids tell you what they want when they want. And if they misbehave or they get upset, then you have to essentially apologize. You have to train them. One of the things we tell our people at New City, one thing I tell people when I meet with them is you're not your kid's friends. You're your kid's mom or you're your kid's dad. Now, again, if they're older and they're over 18, they graduate high school and move out of the house, that's different. There's a mentor friendship there. That's different. But if they're high school or younger, maybe here's just a principle for you. You're not their friend. You're their mom. You're their dad. And so you should act like it. You should have expectations. You should rebuke them. You should discipline them in a loving and kind manner. And so I just want to say, number 2, kids need discipline, and they should have you should have behavioral expectations for your children, because that will reflect how your people view you at your church. So how you parent actually matters. Number 3, that being said, don't worry if your kids act like kids. So here's another encouragement. You should, yes, discipline, have expectations, and be a leader in your church in that way. However, if your kids do something, make a mistake, sin, do something dumb, I want to tell you, that's also okay. It's okay if your kid acts like a kid. So for our kids, we have expectations for their behavior. We discipline them. We have, we were trying to train them in righteousness. But if they do something that kids typically do, and something maybe they've never done before, something we haven't talked about, Yeah, we're gonna like talk about it and maybe there might be some discipline, whatever. But like, I'm not gonna like freak out about it. I'm not gonna feel bad that if my 7-year-old son acts like a 7-year-old boy in a way that's appropriate, that sort of thing. If he does something crazy, egregious, absolutely. But I also want to say too, like I don't care. Like if my kid does something wrong, or like Christine and I, like if our kids go somewhere, like we want the parents to tell us, or like sometimes in kids ministry, we've heard like, hey, one of your kids did this. Like we want to know. We want to know so that we can lovingly correct them and walk with them. And also, like, I just don't feel guilty. And so maybe that's my encouragement too. Again, if there's a balance here. If your kid's always wilding out, always being crazy, always getting in trouble, that's a different conversation. But if your kid does kids things, which means sometimes they're going to do something as they learn and they grow they shouldn't have done, like that's okay too. So on the one hand, you should lead your family and your kids well. And on the other hand, you should have grace for your kids to act like children. And so you gotta manage that tension well. But I just want to encourage you too, like it is okay. So my kids are 10 and 7, maybe a couple of years as they become teenagers or whatever, they're probably going to do, at some point they're going to do something that's going to really disappoint me. But if it was a new thing we haven't talked about, whatever, depending on what it is, like there should be some expectation that they're going to make some bad decisions. Now, that doesn't excuse it. That doesn't make it okay. That doesn't mean that it's not going to be talked about or corrected or dealt with in a godly manner. But it does mean that like it's okay if your kids act like kids. And again, part of this might be your church tradition, the church you grew up with. You might have a lot of pressure from people in your congregation, of like all the pastor's kids. If they ever don't tell the truth, if we ever find out that they did something wrong, then it's like I don't know. So there's a tension there. Personally, I would just encourage you, if your kids act like kids, that's also okay too. You want to train them for righteousness and godliness, yes, but it's okay if they're acting like children, and like you don't need to feel bad about it. Like if your kid, I don't know, does something at school and gets in trouble, and maybe somebody at church finds out about it, like I can't believe, it's like, well, they're kids. And I just would give you the permission, whether or not someone else is frustrated, to like be okay with it. So I don't know if these last 2 points maybe seem somewhat contradictory. I think they're a tension to be managed. The second point, that your kids need discipline, and you should have behavioral expectations. And the third one, don't worry if your kids act like kids. It's like they hold that tension together because they are kids. And I think maybe perhaps what some like preacher kids get resentment of over time is they felt like they were held to an unfair standard or bar. And so we don't want to do that. We want them to hold to a bar of like trying to follow Jesus at an age appropriate level and that sort of thing. But we don't want to like make it unfair that or have different expectations just because like they're your kids. They should have the same expectation that any godly parent would have for their children. It shouldn't be increased just because they're your children, if that makes sense. So number 3, don't worry if your kids act like kids. You should expect it and you should love them. And if other people in your church like freak out about it, maybe have a conversation, but it's like, hey, remind them like they're kids. And so they're going to do kid things and we're going to train them and kind of correct them and love them through it. But it's okay if a child acts like a child. So I just want to say that. And number 4, I would really encourage this. Number 4, ask for approval before sharing stories of your kids from a sermon, illustration, or whatever. Now, generally speaking, you should do this anyway. Maybe the only exception is like if your kids are like a toddler or a baby, like it's fine. One of my, again, pet peeves on parenting, like on social media, for example, like one of the rules that we have for our family with our kids, and I would encourage everyone to do this, is like regardless of how old our kids were, even when they were toddlers, we would never post a picture of them crying or being upset or doing something that they would find embarrassing that I would find embarrassing about me. So for example, we expect a 2-year-old to perhaps throw a temper tantrum at some time. And so people will post about it online and kind of like make a joke, whatever. And it's like, no, man, like as an adult, you wouldn't want somebody showing a video of you throwing a temper tantrum or from you crying or being upset or losing your temper. And so even though they're kids, like we just don't do that. We don't think it's fair to them. And especially too, as they get older, they might look back and like be really upset that you did that. And so, I think the same thing goes like for sharing stories. Like you shouldn't share something. Again, I think it's a little bit different. Like if your kid is crying, like your baby is crying, maybe that's different. But even for us, like anything that would embarrass our kids, we don't share. Now, our kids are 10 and 7. So we're at the age now where like not everything I share about them I ask their approval on. It's only if I think they would find it embarrassing or I'm not sure they want me to do it. And if I'm unsure, I ask them. So like, for example, this week I shared, I was looking on ChatGPT. I'm about to turn 35. My son, Roman, is 7. And so I was asking based on my age and his age and, how the body breaks down and develops, like how many more years until he can beat me in a race? Like athletically, he can try as hard as he wants. He can't even be in anything right now. But at what age, how long until like that starts to change? And ChatGPT said about 7 years old, in about 7 years. So when he's 14 and when I'm 42, I can try my hardest, he can try his hardest, and he can probably start beating me in some things. Now, I didn't ask his permission to share that story because it's not, who cares? It's funny. It's not even funny. It's just like I was using an illustration to talk about something else. So in that situation, I wouldn't ask. Now, when they become teenagers and they're in the service all the time, I would definitely always ask them. But for now, it's like if I know they don't care, or paint them in a positive light, I'll do it. If I'm unsure, or if I know, like, even if when they were like 4 years old and they were freaking out, and maybe it was funny because they're like 3 or 4 years old, I wouldn't share the story because I just don't think it's fair to them. And so I would just say, like, always ask approval. Those coffee mugs that's like, be careful what you say or whatever around your pastor, because you may end up in a sermon illustration. You've probably seen those. To me, I'm always kind of like, man, I get it's a joke. But also, like, I don't want that to be true of my family and my friends. Like, I don't want people walking on eggshells being like, well, if I say something about Dylan, he might use it without my permission. Like, always just ask. Always just ask. And so that's my thing here is like, I would just encourage you, regardless of the age of your children, to get their approval if you're unsure. And if you're not sure, it's probably best not to share it. I would encourage you not to share stories where your kids look dumb, or you're making fun of your kids, even if you're not really making fun of your kids, but it's like, hey, my kid made a dumb decision without their permission, because over time, what you say about your kids from stage colors how your people view your kids. And so they could view your kids unfair. They could view your kids as like, maybe you make fun of how like they're unathletic or they're clumsy or they're not musical or whatever. And I just think it's just not fair. So you got to be really careful what you share. I'm all about sharing things when I'm proud of my kids, or if they do something that makes a great sermon illustration and it's very neutral, or if it's, something I'm not sure if they would like, I'll ask their permission. And I would just say this too. Their age matters. So like you can't really ask a 4-year-old, hey buddy, if I share this story, would this embarrass you? Like a 4-year-old's they're not going to know how to answer that. And so you probably shouldn't if you're unsure. As they get older, that is when you can start asking the question, hey, can I share this story? Can I do this? I don't share stories of disciplining our kids or if they get in trouble. I just don't think it's fair to them. I'll share stories if they do something awesome because I'm proud of my kids and I love my kids. But I just feel like it's unfair to them. And so I just encourage you to protect your kids in that way for a lot of reasons. But for here, I would just say always ask approval before sharing stories of your kids if you're not sure that this would be helpful for them or wise for them. And I would just say this, even if you're not like, well, I don't lead a big church, so it's not like all these people are going to go back and listen to my sermons. Yes, I get that. However, what you say about your kids from stage shapes how everyone else in your church views your kids, and it might be unfair to them. So just be careful. Ask for approval the older they get. If they're younger, I would just err on the side of, if I wouldn't want someone sharing this story about me, even at my age, I don't care that they're 2 or 3 years old. I don't think it's fair to them, so I'm not going to share the story. That's my advice. So ask for approval before sharing stories if they paint your kids in a bad light, an embarrassing light, whatever. All right, number 4. Number 5 is this. Just remember this. How you parent can help or hurt your leadership. How you parent can help or hurt your leadership. So this kind of goes with the second point, that they need discipline and you should have expectations for them. But how you parent can help and hurt your leadership. So again, there's qualifications for elders about running their household well. People will see what you do. And if it seems like, again, if your kids make a mistake, they do something, they misbehave, and they can tell that like you as a parent don't really do anything about it or make excuses for it or allow it to continue to happen over and over and over again, that shapes how they view leadership. And maybe right or wrong, and I'm not saying it's right all the time, but it shapes how I view other people's leadership. So again, I share that story of the elder. There's other stories I could share just like that. What's like, man, like, I'm going to put it this way. There are people over the years where I was like, I would not want to ask you for parenting advice. If you're a leader at your church, not that you have to have perfect kids, but you should parent in such a way that you should say, you know what? People in my church should want to ask me for parenting advice. People that haven't had kids yet, or people who have had kids that are stages of younger than me. I get if you're different. Like if you haven't had teenagers, people with teenagers, they're not going to want to ask you for parenting advice. But like people who have not yet had kids, if you do have kids, or people who have kids at stages that are younger than your current stage, that you've been through it before, they should want to ask you for parenting advice. And if not, that probably is going to color how they view you as a leader. So again, just remember, how you parent can help or hurt your leadership. My experience, it's not that people expect your kids to act perfectly, but if they see like, hey, your kid does something and you address it, or you have your kid misbehaves and you have them apologize, like that goes a really long way. Especially in our culture today where people don't really expect kids to do that. So like if one of our kids does something wrong or they treat someone wrong, or whatever, and we have them go and apologize, that really, I think, gains respect of that person. Now, to be clear, we're not having our kid apologize so that they'll respect me or Christina more. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do. But I think it speaks well. Like again, kids are going to act like kids. They're going to do some dumb stuff. And so how do you handle that situation is a really big deal. And how you parent, right or wrong, fair or unfair, I shouldn't say right or wrong. I should say fair or unfair, will help or hurt your leadership. Man, so are you like being the type of parent that you think others would want to emulate? And if you're not, maybe you didn't have parental models to learn from, that sort of thing. I would just like be intentional, read some books, find some parenting podcasts, people you respect. But like you should be running your household, not your kids. Your kids should have expectations for behavior and you should be disciplining them. You should be training them for righteousness and for godly living. And so just how you parent your kids will help or will hurt. It won't be neutral. Here, probably the thing I would emphasize here, it's not going to be neutral. That people are going to form an opinion of how you parent if they see your kids or if they see you interact with your kids. And is it going to be positive or negative? It's probably not going to be neutral. Okay? It's probably not going to be neutral. So how you parent can help or hurt your leadership. That was, number 4. That was actually number 5. And then number 6 is this. Work to ensure your kids know you love them more than you love the church. So here, maybe it's just a general principle for me. I have a goal, and I've never said it to my kids. At some point, they might hear me say it. So maybe when they're 18, they'll say it. But maybe not. And even if they never articulate it to me, here's what I want them to know. I want my kids to know, to never doubt when they were growing up, that their dad loved them more than he loved the church. Like I never want my kids to doubt that I love them more than I love New City Church. Now, here's the thing. This does not mean that sometimes I don't work late or go out of town or take a work meeting at night or miss a family dinner. That's not what that means. What that means is consistently over time, I have rhythms and practices in my life that show my kids they matter. So I have this dream that like when they're 18 years old, again, they might not articulate it, but they would know, like if somebody were to ask them, they'd be like, I've always knew my dad loved me more than he loved the church because he prioritized me, the family. He came to my things. He loved me. He supported me. He told me he was proud of me. He spent time with me. He played with me. He went on dates with me. Like, that's what I want. I also have this other hope for my kids that when they get older and people find out that they were like a PK, a pastor's kid, that when they hear that term, they'd be like, I don't even understand. Like, what do you mean? That they wouldn't, I mean, in some way, kids don't know anything different than what their own lived experience has been. But like, that they wouldn't be like, oh, I had these different expectations, or because I was a pastor kid, my life was different, or I had to do different things or whatever. Like, my hope is that like, when they graduate high school, they'll be like, yeah, I had a normal childhood. And yeah, my dad worked on Sundays and he had a church job. So in that way, it will, impact them. But this whole, like, they were a preacher's kid. So therefore their life was somehow weird and different. Maybe weird is not the right word, but all this different. They'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Now, again, there's some of that you can't avoid. So again, they're going to be, more known in our church just because they're my kids. And there's going to be a little bit more of a glass fishbowl around them and my family just because, like, in our community, everyone knows who we are. Not Raleigh, but our church community. So I get that. But I'm just saying, like, I wouldn't be like, no, I was just a normal kid and my dad was a pastor and like that, it was fine. Like, I don't really understand this whole, like, I was a preacher's kid. Like, what are you talking about? And so again, I would just encourage you, work to ensure your kids know you love them more than you love the church. I think part of this is just having good rhythms and practices around your work. This is not being lazy. You should work hard and you should get after it. Sometimes so as I'm recording this, it's the day after Easter. And, there's like some social media stuff about like, I saw this one last week. It was like, this guy was like asking church staff, so what are you doing after Easter? And the implication is like Easter was so stressful and you're going to take like a break. And then it was like Mother's Day and graduation and camp and like vacation Bible school. And it was this idea that like ministry is always stressful. And it really bugged me because I'm like, well, if you're a grown adult and you have a full-time job, you should work. Like, you should expect to work. Like, that's not a weird thing. And it's also bugged me because it's like this idea that it's like ministry has to be overwhelmingly stressful all the time. And I just want to say, it doesn't. It will be if you don't have rhythms and practices around your life. I think one of the challenges in ministry is that your schedule is a lot more flexible, or like you run your schedule more than being told what to do, depending on your role in your job. And so what can happen is if you're undisciplined with your time, you can spend way more time on this podcast. I talk a lot about sermon prep and how, in my opinion, a lot of pastors spend way too much time on sermon prep. It's because they're not focused and disciplined when they're doing it. And so they're checking their email, social media. They don't do it at the same time and place every week. And so they're trying to fit in their calendar. They get distracted. They don't do it when they're their most focused. They do it. They kind of try to fit in the margins. And so like it just takes forever, and it shouldn't. And so like I want to work hard while I'm working hard, and I'm going to be disciplined, and then I'm going to have healthy boundaries, and I'm going to spend time with my kids, and I've got rhythms and practices with my kids. Take like a monthly date with my kids every single month, one-on-one. Try to go out of my way to have experiences with them, to play with them, to do things that are interesting to them, that sort of thing. So they would grow up never wondering like, did my dad love me more than the church? Now they're going to know that their dad was going to work hard, and so he's sometimes going to have stuff to do. He's going to have to be places, but it's going to be like, yeah, that happens. Life happens, but like my dad loves me, and so that's my encouragement. Like, love, discipline, care for your kids, but be intentional with them in such a way that they never question, man, do they love me more than they love the church? So again, this does not mean that you never work evenings, but I do think you probably limit the number of evenings you do things. You're intentional about taking vacation with your kids, spending time with your kids, playing with your kids, being like, hey, I'm not just going to like, when they ask to play, spend time with them, like I'm going to be intentional to create memories, to go do things and to spend time with them. So that's like my biggest encouragement is like, I want my kids to like love the church and love us. And of course, as a parent, if they have a good relationship with me, they're going to have a much better relationship with the church because, again, as a parent in ministry, like they're going to view the church through what their parents do. And if they have a bad relationship with their parents, that's really going to color how they view the church and how they view Jesus, which is not good. And so we want to work to it. I would just encourage you, work to ensure your kids know that you love them more than you love the church. This does not mean that you don't work hard or that you're like never do things at church or whatever. But it does mean you have rhythms and practices that ensure that your kids know you work hard, but you love them well. So that's my dream. So kind of talking about a lot there. Let me kind of bring these all together again and rephrase them. Here are 6 tips for parenting and ministry. Number 1, your kids don't have to do more than other kids. So just remember that. They don't have to do more than other kids just because you're your kids. Number 2, kids need discipline, and you should have behavioral expectations for your children. You should. Number 3, do not worry at the same time if your kids act like kids. Have grace, have love, have forgiveness. They're going to be kids. So like, don't be embarrassed or don't be surprised if they act like kids. You should give them that grace. Number 4, ask for approval before sharing stories. Like, don't embarrass your kids. Don't make fun of your kids. Don't do that. It's not kind to them. Number 4. Number 5, remember how you parent can help or hurt your leadership. And then number 6, work to ensure your kids know you love them more than you love the church. Here's my observation and reminder for this episode. It's this: hey, share stories. People don't care about numbers. Share stories. So if you're a church planter and you're trying to recruit people to a launch team or to recruit a church to give you funding, share stories. If you're sharing vision for a church plant, or you're sharing vision for a current church and you're changing directions, or you're making a move, like New City, we're about to move in a couple months, portable from our own space. Share stories, not statistics. I've shared this before, but I'm just reminded last week I met with 2 church planters in the Raleigh area who are planting in the next 6 to 9 months. And I was refreshed because neither one of them came with demographics and statistics. Now, it's not to say you can't share some of that stuff, but like why they're planting in the area. And neither one of them did that. It was just like, I think the pressure is like, why are you planting here? And you have to like, well, this percentage of people are this, and this percentage of people don't go to church. It's like, no, I am completely unmoved. I need to know why you're changing, why you're planting, why our church is changing vision. Like, what's the story? Who we're going to impact? What's it going to look like when we impact them? And so I just want to encourage you, again, we're about to raise a bunch of money because we're about to move, and it's just going to be sharing stories. I could share like, and it's not that I won't talk about this at all. Like, here's how much we are in the budget. Here's why financially this makes sense. Here's why we're doing this. Here's what we have to buy. Here's why we need your help. Yes. But that sounds a lot better is that and here's what I fully believe. So maybe let's take a second here. I shared this with our church a few weeks ago as I'm recording this because it's true and I believe it. But it's also like way more effective. So I was sharing how like God moves through open doors and closed doors. We're going through Acts and right now, and there's a story where Paul wants to go to Bithynia in Asia, and God like closes the door twice, and then he goes to Philippi and Corinth and Athens and all sort of things. And God's providence and grace happened in both the situations. So if Paul was probably never told why he couldn't go to these 2 cities, even though they needed the gospel, he really wanted to get there, but God closed those doors. And I just kind of walked through the story of New City about like how New City was planted and all the doors that were closed to make it happen, just to encourage people. And then I even shared like, we're going portable, and it felt at the time like a really closed door. About 6 months ago, we decided, hey, we're ending our lease here. It's too expensive. We would need to raise a bunch of money to upfit a space. And we didn't feel like it was the prudent thing to do at our church. So we're going to a church. It's bigger, which is a big need of ours. It's way less expensive, which is a huge benefit to us. But I was explaining like how this whole thing went down. It felt like a closed door. But here's what I fundamentally know is going to happen. So we're going to move into the school. It's right next to this big neighborhood. It's a different place. At some point, probably in the next couple of months, somebody's going to end up coming to our church. And it's not because they Googled us or they found us online. Now, they might look at our church online before they come, but that's not how they found us. They're going to be driving along, and they're going to see our sign, our flag, or something. And because we're perhaps going to be close to where they live, they're going to decide, you know what, I'm going to go to that church. Life's hard. I saw this flag. It was whatever. I'm just going to go. And they're going to come to our church, and they're going to sit down next to one of you guys. And you're going to have a conversation with them and ask them how they found out about New City or how they're doing. And it's going to be the first genuine conversation they've had in another human being that actually cared about them in perhaps a week or a month. And they're just going to experience love and kindness and grace. And they're going to hear about the life-saving message of Jesus. And they're going to go to life. They're going to go from death to life in Jesus' name because we met in this school. That's the only reason. It's not because of some slick marketing campaign or because they listened to a sermon that I preached online and like, this guy's great. I want to hear more about him. Like that ain't it. They're simply going to see a sign, and we're only going to be there because God closed doors. And I just think, not only again, do I 100% believe that's going to happen, that's just so much more compelling than saying, well, if we move to the school, we can reach 50 more people and we can do this. Even though like 50 is greater than 1, it's not a story. So if you're raising money, share stories. If you're changing the vision of your church, share stories. Stories are way more important than statistics. Statistics can help, but at the end of the day, nobody really cares about them. Here is the personal growth tip for this episode, and it's this. Do you need to try something different or try harder? Do you need to try something different, or do you actually just need to try harder? You see, getting this right can make all the difference in the world. So for example, is your workout plan not leading to results because you aren't actually following the plan? For example, you're not exercising as much as you said you would, or is it because it's not a good plan? In other words, you are following the workout plan, you're just not seeing the results. Again, so many times we could say, hey, the plan's wrong when we're not actually following it. So is it we're not following it, or is it we are following it, but it's not producing the results that we wanted? How about this? Do you spend too much time on email because you aren't following a plan? In other words, you're checking it outside of times you designated to check it. It's on your phone. Anytime you get bored and doing a task you don't want to do, you're just checking it all day. Or is it because it's not a good plan? In other words, maybe you do plan to check it a certain amount of times a day, and you check it too many times during the day, and you need to reduce it. And so is your problem in email because you don't have a good plan, or because you actually need to create a plan and try harder? Or how about this? Number 3, do you struggle to focus at work because you aren't following the plan? So for example, you schedule out your workday, but you don't actually follow the schedule? Or because your plan to focus is not a good plan. For example, you don't schedule out your workday, or your plan is to try your best not to look at your phone, but you can't resist all the notifications that you should be turning off your phone to begin with. So again, do you not focus because your plan is bad, or because you don't have a plan? Because you're not trying hard enough, or you need to try something different? You see, sometimes we need to put more effort into executing our plan. Other times, we simply need to have a different plan. However, before you can change your plan, you need to make sure you actually gave the current plan a real shot. In other words, you actually followed it and found it didn't work. So if you have a plan for something and it's not working, make sure you're actually doing the plan first before you realize it's the plan's fault and not yours. Sometimes our plan is good, but it is too lofty. So for example, going from never exercising to going to the gym 5 days a week, not a good plan. In that case, we need to make our plan easier until we can build up the habit, and then we can make it bigger. So for example, going to the gym 2 days a week, and then maybe bumping it up to 3 after a month if you've done it every single week. So hear me, if you're stuck, actually commit to your plan or change your plan. Just don't give up quite yet. Today's question comes from our Practical Church Facebook group. If you're on Facebook, you're not part of the Practical Church group. I think there's like 2,400 people in there, church leaders in there. Get in there, ask questions. A lot of really helpful people. Somebody recently asked this: what do you use for baptisms? What do you use for baptisms? So here's what we use for baptisms. We use a horse trough, and that has a heater. And actually, we don't even have it. There's a church in the area that we actually borrow theirs from every time we have to do baptisms, so we don't have to store it. It's great. But we use just like a metal horse trough, and then it's got like these water heaters that you plug in, and then you drop them in the water, and it warms it up. That's what we use. Those work. I've seen people done. I think this question is more for like people who are portable, or even like us who's not portable. But especially if you're portable, I've seen a lot of churches use those. I personally am a fan of those because they're relatively light and they don't take up a lot of space. You could do something like pools, but they can be bigger. I spoke to a church 2 weeks ago that was going to give us their baptismal because we're going portable, and this thing was huge. I mean, it had wheels, but it was huge, and it took up a ton of space, and it was really heavy, and I was like, that ain't going to work. So we just use, something you could probably get like Tractor Supply. It's a big silver horse trough. You've undoubtedly seen the pictures. We fill it up, while we're filling it up, we plug it in. It takes like, I don't know, 10 minutes to fill it up, probably 30 minutes to warm up. So like you could, if you're portable or whatever, you could fill it up that morning, plug in the water warmers, whatever they're called. I'm sure they're not called that. And then we just take them out before we do the baptism. And that's how we do it. So I've seen inflatable things, bigger things. My thing is just find something, especially if you're portable, that's not very big. It doesn't take up a lot of space. And the nice thing about like a horse trough is like you also, if you have it on a trailer or whatever, it actually can. I have a Honda CRV and it can fit my CRV, which is really convenient. But it also has space to put things in it. So you can also put other things in it when you're moving it around. So that's what we use. Horse trough, it works great. I mean, if we had a built-in baptismal, we would do something different. But for what we need, and the little metal things that you can find on Amazon, I probably should look this up beforehand. If you look on Amazon, water warmers, I don't even know. But there's like 2 or 3 of them. You just plug them in. It works really simple. And then it's got this suction. When we're done, we have this like little machine that sucks the water out before, and then we can tip it over. But you connect a hose to it, and it kind of pulls up the water, and it drains the water that way. So that's what we use. We've done that actually model since we've launched for 8 years, and it's worked great for us. Something else works for you, but that's what we use for our baptisms at New City Church. So again, thanks so much for joining us on the Practical Church podcast today. My name is Dylan Dotson. If you want more from me, you can go to dylandotson.com. I've got a newsletter called The Best Minute. I send out every Tuesday, other resources as well. So you can check me out there. As always, not New City Church, Practical Church is brought to you in partnership with Mission Support. So graphic videos, we talked about that earlier today. But listen, if you need bookkeeping, SEO, websites, all sorts of things, missionsupport.com, missionsupport.com. See their services, talk to a guy today. One of the best things about Mission Support is they don't lock you into any long-term contracts. You can use it as long as it's helpful for you and move on if it's not. So check out missionsupport.com, and I'll be back with you in 2 weeks for another episode on the Practical Church podcast.